I'd like to introduce John Weaver. John he's the Chief Operating Officer of MBI, who's gracious enough to let us use this facility. So thank you for that. And it's always good to be here. It's a nice venue. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Great, thank you, Phil.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming out on what turned out to be a beautiful night in Worcester. We're very excited to be partnering with the Venture Forum on this event and to have Nick here tonight. I think one of the most exciting things for me is to see kind of the startup ecosystem that's going on in the city of Worcester, and the important role that Venture Meets and Venture Forum and all of these groups that have developed in the city really play in that. I want to thank kind of all of you for supporting that too. MBI is a nonprofit biotech incubator in the city. We have 25 tenant companies that several of them are with us tonight, so thank you guys for coming out. These guys are really leading the future of healthcare, so it's really exciting to see what's happening in the city of Worcester in that field, and we appreciate all the MBI tenants who came out tonight too. Thrilled tonight to be joined by Nick Pappas. Nick is Vice President of MassVentures, the Commonwealth's venture capital arm. Nick has been focused on supporting early stage tech companies for about 15 years now. And he's been in both an investor and investment banker role in doing that. Prior to MassVentures, Nick was senior technology investment banker with Oppenheimer Company. And he holds an MBA from the Sloan School at MIT and a graduate of the University of Richmond. Nick is no stranger to Worcester. He's been out here a lot, which we really appreciate. And he's been a great supporter of kind of the startup ecosystem that's going on in this area. And we're hoping tonight to have a pretty casual forum. This is kind of an opportunity to ask the questions of the venture capital world that you've been dying to know. So we hope to have a pretty interactive component. I'll start off by asking a question, and I have a list of things. But my hope is really to have this more driven by you all. One of the things I was hoping to do is, who in the audience here is an entrepreneur, calls himself an entrepreneur? Excellent. Anybody work at a startup? Great. Who's in kind of support roles, consultants and IP attorneys? I know I spoke to a few. Okay. Any funders, venture capital, angels? Excellent. Well, excellent. It's just good to know kind of who's here tonight. So, with that, please join me in welcoming Nick Pappas. And I guess we'll start off with Nick. Can you just tell us a little bit about you and MassVentures and kind of kick us off that way?
Sure. So for those who don't know who we are, I think the folks at the Venture Forum have known us since the beginning of the Venture Forum. I believe we were a founding sponsor, so we've been out here for quite some time. I've been with MassVentures for about 7 years now, and we are, as John mentioned, the state's venture capital fund. We were created as an economic development agency back in 1978. And the mission then is still the mission today, which is to provide gap funding for technology businesses within the Commonwealth. Usually, those gaps can be defined in a number of different ways, and those that we define today are sort of oftentimes the size of the raise is, you're not trying to raise $10 million, which is sort of where you become relevant to some of the larger funds in the quote-unquote private sector. There are gaps geographically which come into play. There are gaps for first-time entrepreneurs, which is often a difficult fundraising process for those who've never done it before and never quote unquote made money for anybody before. So, and the idea is to get those companies through these gaps, and then some people say de-risk. I hate that term, but it's relevant. But I prefer to think about it as helping to grow and establish the business to a point where the sort of household name venture funds and other forms of financing become available to the company. So that's at our core. As I mentioned, we're an economic development agency. So we have some altruistic motivations related to the Commonwealth for job growth and technology development and keeping entrepreneurs hopefully happy here in Massachusetts. But we're also a venture fund, so I get paid to make good investments and make money for the fund. We recycle the fund. It's called an evergreen fund, which means thankfully we don't walk up to Capitol Hill and request money every year, because I'm pretty sure I'd know what the answer to that would be in some years. So we survive on our own wins, and so we're sort of unique to the venture model in that way. I should say we invest typically $300,000 to $500,000 into companies that are looking to raise $1.5 million to $2.5 million on average. I mentioned it's only technology companies, and I sort of define that by there's a Massachusetts Life Science Center which handles everything life science. We do invest in healthcare IT, but it's enterprise software and all the other things that are resident within Massachusetts in the technology side. We don't typically take on clean energy or consumer-related branded tech. Stage-wise, just to give you a sense of where, at what stage we invest, it's typically the first institutional or professional round. There might be some angel money in the company, friends and family money, and this is sort of the first, I hate to call it real round, because every round you're raising is a real round, but it's the first sort of institutional money where you take a quote-unquote professional investor into the fold, and we take a board seat and do all those things that you probably give you nightmares at night. Which we can certainly talk about today. So that's enough. You didn't come to hear me talk about who we are and what we do. So I'm happy to be here. I love coming out here. It's a great energy out here, especially over the last handful of years as we keep coming out. And as I told a few people, I'd much rather drive west than east from my house in terms of traffic. So I always love coming to Worcester. So
Tell your friends.
I have, yeah.
Great. So I think the way we'll handle this is if we have a lot of entrepreneurs here. I'm excited about that. If you have a question for Nick at any point, try to raise your hand, grab my eye, and the next opportunity I'll kind of point you out. And we really want to hear some dialogue from the audience tonight. So, and Tanya will come around with the microphone as well before you start your question. So, first question I wanted to ask is. Coming from a biotech incubator and from the incubation community, every entrepreneur I talk to, whether it's their first day or they've been doing this for a while, thinks they are 100% ready for the next round and for big funding. So I wanted to hear a little bit from Nick as to when is a company ready in your assessment, and really kind of who are the companies that should be targeting venture capital funds as opposed to angel and other sources.
Sure. It depends on sector to a large degree from my point of view. I think a lot of times, and so I'm not an expert in biotech, but certainly the milestones there are much different than an enterprise software company or a mobile technology company that we would look at. But in general, the things that, if I were you, I would look internally and understand the quality of the team. Are there big holes in the management team? Is there someone who can sell, someone who's in charge of the technology, and sort of have those main seats full of talented folks? Is the product in a place where it can be shown to an investor, or their customers tinkering with it? At what stage are you with the customers? A lot of our diligence is focused on talking to customers and sort of vetting the technology from a third-party perspective. Every entrepreneur is going to say their technology is better than the competition, and I don't fault you for thinking that way. But sort of our process is to make sure that's an accurate statement. And so if we can't necessarily do that, and some places have resident technology experts in certain areas, we tend to be more of a generalist fund. So we know many areas quite well, but certainly in other areas we like to rely on third parties to sort of help us vet technology. So it's kind of a triangulation of the management team, the product sort of state of readiness for a commercial sale, and related to that is the kind of traction. And so we try to piece those together internally, and then looking externally, is there a big enough market opportunity that this is even a relevant venture-funded opportunity? We're a bit different, that we tend not to always try to swing for the fences and look for the next multi-billion-dollar business. We can make our returns and fulfill our mission by investing in companies that have reasonable exits, not multi-billion dollars. But still, there are many businesses that we look at and pass on because it feels more like, a modest return or more of a lifestyle business than something that has the potential to have dramatic growth. And I think it's sort of a combination of all of those factors. It's hard to say you are ready now. The best advice is to sort of continue to have conversations with people who are investors and get the feedback and understand from their perspective kind of where you guys are as a startup.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit too about VC versus the angel world and who's ready for each?
Yeah, the angel world is typically a lot earlier than we are, although in some cases I'm sure those of you who have spoken to angels can attest that at some point the more formal groups tend to look more like small venture funds than individual angels who will back companies at an earlier stage. But traditionally, angel investment is much earlier, more around business plan and opportunity, usually from someone who has expertise in that sector or historical sort of track record that can recognize what you all are doing as entrepreneurs and as a company. So that's typically usually less than $1 million. Mm-hmm. Few $100,000, sort of post-seed, friends and family to kind of get you over that hump. And then there's all different sort of stages of venture capital. There's that first round, the quote unquote Series A round, and then growth capital, expansion capital, and all of those that sort of come later. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of a quick overview on how things are.
How many people in the audience think venture capital is part of their future business structure? Okay. I'll be looking at all of you for questions. But
I have questions.
yeah. Tanya will come up with the mic. Right.
Turn on the switch on? Yes. Grab in front. I wonder if you can be a little bit. I'm kind of confused because earlier you said your typical investment is 300 to 500K, mm-hmm. somewhere around there, and you just said typical angel is sub $1 million. Mm-hmm. Where would that put you?
So that, maybe I wasn't clear earlier, the $300,000 to $500,000 check that we write is part of a $2 million round overall. Angel investors are typically on the high end $1 million all in for the round, typically much less than that depending on what type of business you are or what sector you are. It's usually $500,000 or less to sort of get the company going. So when I said $300,000 to $500,000, that was our individual investment as part of a larger round. That's, as I said, that's correct. Part of a syndicate that's roughly $2 million on average is where we kind of come into play.
So can I answer that question?
Sure. Well, I should ask you. You're the...
No, absolutely. No, go for it. Absolutely. Yeah.
In your portfolio, can you describe the chemistry of those investments that you made? Are they mostly composed of initial startup, or they already have revenue traction? And which would you prefer?
So let me turn around. So I would say most, if not all of them, had some initial revenue traction of varying degrees. There are some on there that had $300,000 to $400,000 annually, and there are some that had less than $100,000 for the kind of 12-month period before. So it varies. Like I said, we because of the way we're structured, we're not typically looking at pre-revenue companies because of our desire to have a sort of full-fledged diligence process for our investments. And so if I think about investing in a pre-revenue company, it's probably in something that I've done 3 or 4 deals in before, so I know the space and I can understand, is your technology addressing a real pain in the market, and all of those things that we would look at for an investment. The angel investors are more typically investing pre-revenue than we are. We've come close on a couple, but most of them have some level of revenue traction, even if it's a handful of paid pilots that total $100,000 or something like that.
Gina, once.
I don't need the mic.
I think we need it for the camera, but
Okay.
The camera needs.
Oh, okay.
yeah. So to ruin your flow.
Okay, so I almost forgot my question.
That's the strategy, Gina.
Yeah.
Yes. So my question is in terms of iterative innovation. So you take a company who makes a small incremental change to something that's already going on versus a paradigm changing, very innovative, going to change the way we do things. What is the preferred mode of your investment?
Sure, it's a good question. I think, certainly we would prefer more game-changing ideas than iterative ideas. I mean, there's the overused phrase of it's a nice to have, it's not a need to have, and oftentimes that's a reason for us to pass. If it's just a little bit cheaper and a little bit faster, the question is how differentiated is that over the long term? And so the more quote unquote game changing you are, one hopes that equates to longer differentiation and competitive barriers over time. So while one can make money in sort of iterative technology plays, I think all else equal, I would rather something that's a bit more transformative. Those can be difficult early on and the sales and sort of evangelical pitch of it, but I personally would prefer that. I like to get excited about what I'm investing in, and oftentimes it's hard to get excited about sort of an interim step that you don't know where that takes you in the long run.
Is that typical of your peers, Nick, you think? Or
Yeah, especially the folks with multi-$100 million funds. They are not going to touch an iterative, sort of one step ahead play. They're, like I said, especially those, they need to put 10, 20 million to work in a particular company, and that's typically happening because there's a game-changing play, and they need to show the return to their limited partners, and the only way to do that is to hit massive home runs, acknowledging along the way that you're going to have plenty of strikeouts. That's just the model for big funds. We tend to operate a little differently, because we don't have multi-$100 million fund at our disposal, but we also recognize we can make a nice return on still competitively differentiated technologies that might not end up being billion-dollar ideas. I would venture to guess our average exit is probably in the $100, $150, $250 million range over the 40-year history. So,
did you have a follow-up, Gina?
Yeah, just a follow-up. I was going to say, how long do you keep a stake in a company that doesn't get to that $150 million exit?
So the typical venture, out of every 10 companies, you'll have, I think everyone's probably heard this, that you have 2 that are real winners. You have, 3 or 4 that are total duds within a year, and the rest are sort of, it's an awful term, but it's a term that's used, the living dead, that are just sort of bumping along. They may or may not need more capital, but they're there. We have a little different time horizon than our sort of private counterparts because we don't have LPs that are going to be knocking on the door in 5 years and the fund is almost end of life and they're saying, where the hell's my money? And you just have to say, well, we still have 10 investments that we haven't realized yet. So we can be a little bit more patient. I think we try to be, and it's a good discipline to have, that if things aren't growing the way you think they are, it's good to be intellectually honest with yourself as an entrepreneur and your investor to understand, I think it's time to try to find an exit for the business. And I don't know if that answers your question. As far as time horizon, it's kind of that 3 to 5 year horizon. I don't think any of those companies, Applause we've been in since 2008. It's doing fantastic. Same thing with Owner IQ. So it's hard to, what are you going to tell those guys? Hurry up and go public. So they're doing well, and you don't push them too much. But you get nervous around the companies that are stuck at the typical thresholds, or it can be easier to get to $1 million or $2 million in revenue. The next threshold is to get over 5, and then over 10. Those are dramatically different types of companies that can sort of get over those step functions, and a lot of the companies tend to get stuck at that sub $5 million range, and it's trying to understand what to do with those. That's the difficult part for the entrepreneurs as well as the investors.
Sure. Kim?
All right, I have 2 questions. One on vesting acceleration and one on dilution. So I'm curious.
Deep in the weeds. I like it here.
Is that okay? Well, that's why I didn't go first. I was like,
it's fine.
can I dive? Or?
We've got chalkboards, not a problem. Yeah.
So what's your take on single versus double acceleration, and when would you apply both?
Are you talking about options for employees?
No, for founders.
Okay. So just make sure I understand the question. So you're talking about change of control type of vesting?
Yeah, I mean, anything. Change of control.
Yeah, I mean, I typically like to have the entrepreneurs focused with skin in the game alongside us. Even better if they've invested their own capital. I know that's not always possible, but that's the reason for kind of resetting the vesting for sort of founder shares over time. I've done it all different terms and all different initial sort of cliffs at half, and then the rest vest over 2, 3, 4 years, depending on a number of different factors. I will typically be flexible with the change of control vesting. It just makes sense, and I don't want to. The only caveat is that I want to be sure it doesn't foul up a deal where you've got 1 or 2 employees who can stand in the way of a deal that makes sense for the broader shareholders. So on average, there'll be I'm in favor of some level of vesting at a change of control. It can sometimes be negotiated to a certain percentage is vested automatically, and then the rest vests after a certain point in the deal, so that there's no risk of you being upset for whatever reason, and you decide you happen to own 50% of the company and you're not voting for the deal when it's a good deal for whatever reason. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I think it is really deep. I feel like we could go on probably for a while, so I'll stop there.
The general statement is I would like entrepreneurs, founders, and executive management to be on the same page in terms of they haven't taken all the money off the table. There's still incentive to stay around. And I mean, if you leave the business, what did I invest in? What I'm typically investing in at our stage is you and the market opportunity. And if I lose you 3 months, 12 months into my investment, I don't know where that leaves me. So I want to make sure that you're in that seat and you're motivated.
And then as for dilution, is it more common to apply dilution across the founder and option pool, or just the founder pool? So I guess another way to word it, is the option pool typically diluted as you go through rounds? Because I've been getting varying
yes and no.
opinions on that.
I tend to look at it from a point of view of, is there enough in the pool to hire people that you need to hire during the course of this investment time horizon? If the answer is no, then I need to re-up the pool to make sure either you as the founder are appropriately incentivized, or the people that you're going to bring on as VP of sales or whatever the title is, that you've got enough in the pool to allow those people to participate in the equity in the right way. If you have that, then the pool's going to, by definition, get diluted if I'm not adding anything to it. So I don't look at it as whose backside am I taking it out of when I'm coming into a deal. I look at it more, is there enough around the table to make sure that the appropriate incentives are.
Case by case, depending on what makes sense. Do you think
I
most
will always ask for it to be done before I invest.
do you think most investors have that
I
kind
think
of
so.
approach? Okay.
I think so. The nuances comes when when you're issuing, when you're doing something to the pool in between sort of investment milestones.
Arm, do you have a question? Tanya's coming. Yep.
So when you invest $500,000 in a $2 million round, along with the VCs, say Series A, do you take a board position, or do you? How does it work?
So our model is to, at a minimum, take an observer seat. And I look at it where if, hopefully during the course of diligence and our sort of getting to know each other over whether it's diligence or before that even starts, that I've demonstrated and my other partners have demonstrated that we're going to add value to the business. If we don't think that's there, then we probably should decide not to do the deal together. I look at it as if I can't add value, I probably shouldn't do the deal anyway. There's plenty of other deals. There's plenty of other sources of capital for you to pursue and for me to pursue. I'd like to be in a situation where I'm coming into a company and I've got sort of a shared vision, and it's the whole marriage analogy that I'm sure everyone's heard 1,000 times. But so at a minimum, we're typically taking an observer seat. Probably more often than not, it's an actual board seat. So
If it's a $2 million round, you put $500,000. So if there are two other investors, so there'll be 3 new directors going into the company along with that first round?
The other folks might not care as much as I do. And so what I'd say is it depends on it's not driven by a dollar amount. I've invested $500,000 and taken an observer seat. I've invested $300,000 and been a lead director. So it really varies on a case-by-case basis. Other people that are in the syndicate of other investors might be angel groups, might be other VCs who don't care to have a board seat. It might be a corporate venture group that often doesn't take a board seat. So it can be a number of different dynamics. But for us, our model, given that the sort of the gap funding and helping to grow the business that I described earlier, that comes sort of hand in hand. If we're addressing the right gap and we think we can add value, then we really should be either on the board or an observer to help you get to the point. Over time, I'm going to probably, as you raise more money, I'm going to step aside as bigger and bigger checks and the brand name VCs come in. I think in Applause's case, we were initially a director, and now some $60-70 million raised later, we're an observer. Same thing with Owner IQ, and so that's kind of the natural progression of how we work. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying yes.
Yeah, one more question. Regarding you said your average exit is $150 million.
That's a guess. Don't quote me.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Let's take 150. And how long did it take for those companies to exit? Is it 5 years, 7 years?
It's all over the place. It's all over the place. It really is. I think on average it's probably 5-7 years.
So those mergers and acquisitions, or were there any IPOs?
Has anyone gone public recently?
No.
For the most part, they've all been M&A. Back in more relevant IPO days, we had, I think, a couple-year span where we had 5 or 6 IPOs over the course of those years. That's just not happening as much anymore. You're seeing that with the big unicorns that are just going off and raising $300 million on a Series D, E, F round rather than going public. So it's back when I was an investment banker in the early 2000s and late 99, everybody was going public as you could, and you could get the money that way. It's just become a different environment.
Where would in mergers and acquisitions, is it going by per sales, or is it EBITDA earnings before interest tax?
It really depends. It depends. It depends on sector. It depends on your growth. It depends on if you're profitable. It can be all over the map. All over the map. I know it's not a very helpful answer to you, but in my M&A days, I spent a lot of time with software companies, and it was sort of a triangulation of growth rate and a multiple of sales, and frankly, hopefully a competitive premium because there were 10 other buyers at the table.
Okay, so basically, you try to do an auction when you're trying to exit with a mergers and acquisition.
That is a whole other topic that we could spend days on,
Okay.
I'm sure, but there are many ways to run a process. The best way just depends on the number of buyers, the type of company you are, and how to best create a competitive process. Sure. I think
Thank you.
Amy has a question too.
I'm right next to the mic.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier that a huge hurdle is to get a company from a $1 million company to a $5 million company. Do you have strategies in place to help those companies achieve those goals? And if so, how effective are they?
That's a good question. So we really, in the early days, it comes down to effectively understanding the value prop and walking into a customer and being able to articulate that. It really comes down to fine-tuning the message and the sales process. The hardest thing I've seen for our companies is to find the right director of sales, sales lead that can help formalize and create that repeatable sales process. And it is not easy to make that hire right the first time, frankly, or the second time. And so, do we have a winning playbook? I can't, sort of hand the manual over. I think it's really understanding it's understanding the market, understanding the customer, and sort of really being able to tailor your message, and over time migrating toward a message that is consistently winning. We certainly make introductions to others in our portfolio that have gone over these hurdles before, and what did it take, and a lot of it's just getting used to what you think the customer, you have this perception of what the customer should be hearing and why they'd value you. That may or may not be accurate. And oftentimes it's not accurate the first or the second time. And you end up migrating the messaging a couple of times before you're getting it right. So that's kind of the struggle of this 1 to 5 million is you can get a couple early customers that sort of recognize what you're saying, and then how do you expand on that? And did you just get lucky with the first few that sort of the message resonated, and how do you tweak the message to get to the 5 million? 5 million and beyond becomes more of a process question than it becomes the messaging question. And so there's no magic answer, but I will say it is extremely important to make sure you vet and hire the right salespeople up front. I tend to love having a CEO or a founder that has sales experience because they're typically the chief salesperson as well. And if not that we shy away from technical founders, because there's a huge advantage to that as well. But that sort of CEO sales founder has already got that box checked off, assuming they're sort of married up with a technical expert. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
Pretty much, yes.
okay. There was,
Hi,
yep.
Nick, how many of these are technical IT-related companies on this board?
Sure. Are you talking hardware or
Software.
So they're all software, except for, well, you could argue Ginkgo is software as well. They're all software in various sectors. So
Is that your specialty, software?
it has been our sort of traditional sweet spot of enterprise software. We do have, though it's not necessarily represented here, this is just sort of a smattering. We do have a history in manufacturing, tech, and robotics as well. So we've done a lot of hardware investments in that space. We're probably, we run a matching grant program for SBIR Phase 2 companies in certain sectors. And if you combine that in our equity portfolio, we're probably the largest robotics investor in Massachusetts, if not more broadly than that.
So does your robotics involve machine vision, or is it just?
Yep, we've have motor companies in there. We have arm companies that have a component of machine vision for pick and place applications. We had Harvest Automation was one of our companies, and they were sort of in the agricultural space. There's an element of vision and sensing to that as well.
And how do you arrive at a valuation of a company? Is it based on the revenues, which could keep growing, and then is it the business plan? I don't know. How do you?
It's that is the $1,000,000 question. No pun intended. My partner, when I first joined 7 years ago, he had a very interesting formula, which is extremely scientific. That's tongue in cheek, and you'll hear why in a second. I'm trying to remember it because he's quoted it to me a few times. Two people in a business plan is $1 million, and two people a business plan and some early customers is 3 to 5 million. And if you've got something dramatically special, it's twice those numbers. And while I sort of chuckle at it, that's kind of the ballpark where we invest. Our typical investments, it's gone up lately just because I think the market has gotten a little bit frothy. Our typical pre-money investment is around somewhere between 3 and 8 is sort of where the companies are. We've done less, we've done more. I'd say it's rare that our pre-money valuations are double digits, just by the nature of what stage we're investing. There's typically not a ton of revenue, and it's not done on revenue. It's sort of done on entrepreneurs always hate this, but it's sort of done on a gut feel and what the market is sort of dictating. I try to, and if I can anticipate where you're headed next, I try not to tell entrepreneurs to focus too much on the valuation. It's really just one term, a small term that has numbers associated with it that people tend to latch onto. And the idea of top-ticking your first valuation is a horrible idea. And I'm not saying that in any kind of self-serving, sneaky venture guy sort of way. It's the idea of where do you go from there? You're sort of setting yourself up. If you top-tick, let's say you're raising your first round, and reality is it's a $10 million pre-money, and you fight and get a $15 million pre-money. Well, what happens in the next 12 months when, as this question here was, you're not hitting the sales numbers and you're sort of bumping along sideways? Where do you think that next valuation is going when you go to raise money next? If it's going down, and the last thing you want to do is on your second round have a down round. And so it's sort of this art of figuring what's fair to the entrepreneur with option holders and the people that are gutting it out day in and day out in the business, marrying that up with what's fair to the investors coming in, given the level of risk and where the company is, but also trying to think about the next round and where there's room to grow that valuation rather than, all right, now we have an unbelievable amount of pressure on you guys as entrepreneurs to hit your numbers. And I can almost guarantee you with 99.9% accuracy, you will not hit your numbers. And so if you run out of money and you haven't hit your numbers, the only place I'm looking is down, and you don't want to do that. And so I tend to, it's an important thing to, valuation is an important metric, but it is not the only metric. I'll give you the valuation if I get, my preferences and certain features in my preferred stock that really take you out of would make your valuation irrelevant based on other terms in the documents. So it's kind of, people tend to get fixated on my valuation so they can sort of pound their chest and say we did a deal at X million dollars pre-money and aren't we great?
it's not the only term to pay attention to.
Just one last question. You are inviting capital from others too, right? It's not your own.
I'm sorry,
No, you are inviting capital from other investors as well.
David, and then, yeah.
Hi, Nick. David Habatazi, Zata Pharmaceuticals.
MBI All-Star.
I think we met when I was out here last.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
were
Right,
together
on
the tour.
for
Yep.
45 seconds. Now I want to a longer time. So, question I have: do you guys have specific mass criteria for biotechs to consider funding? And question why I'm asking this one: a few times I applied one government agency, and I was told to apply for that program. You need a W-2 coworker. No, it doesn't happen overnight. I got one. I'm approaching. They are telling, "Oops, program is closed." Now here is nice program, SBI grant matching program. Obviously, writing grants and getting funding also takes time. And guess what? It's the same thing happens. Program is covered and was offered, take a credit, and same story. And do you have any specific criteria at this moment that company must meet to consider valuation?
We don't, but what I will say is, and I'll say this sheepishly, we don't invest in biotech companies. And so we are in,
MassVentures.
yeah, so MassVentures, I'm sure it sounds like from your frustration you might have been connected to the Life Science Center in some way, shape, or form. And so they run some programs for companies that we don't touch within sort of the health. The only place we end up in healthcare is healthcare IT. And so things related to biotech, mainly because it's a much richer game than our fund can play. We're a very small fund, and I think my $300,000 you would potentially burn in a month. Being facetious, but it's just a different type of investment. And
The criteria is not to be biotech if you want to deal with them.
yeah.
And we knew that, David. I think the hope was that allows Nick to now be a lot more honest. So, Peng.
I mean, there's the Life Science Center. I know some of their programs run at a certain point in time, and I don't know where they are in the state of those programs. It is certainly a whole within Massachusetts. I think devices is also a whole within Massachusetts. People seem to have migrated away from devices for whatever reason. I don't have a magic answer to go see this person or that group. But yeah, it's for a number of reasons. We're not investing in that space. I'm just not smart enough to invest in that space. First, I think is probably the more important reason. The second one is we don't have the capital to be able to fund those companies.
Let's do Peng, and then I know Kim was over here at her hand. Okay. And then we'll work our way around.
Yes, hi Nick. My name is Wai Pang. I want to ask you for, in terms of entrepreneur's perspective, which pathway add more values? Either seek funding from VC, or directly go to other company that may collaborate with the entrepreneur.
No, that's a great question. I mean, it's one that I always give a non-self-serving answer to, which is go where non-dilutive capital is as much as you can before you come to a venture investor, unless you're going to miss out on a certain amount of growth within your industry. I mean, it's bootstrapping, customer financing, NRE financing, matching grants, anything that's available that is able to advance the business. To get that sort of track record and revenue and the product to a certain stage is all I think a smart thing to do. Then you're in the driver's seat because you've got other cash. You're not coming to raise venture as your only option. The only caveat to that is if the growth prospects are so great in what you're attempting to do that you need that type of venture money to be able to hit that and ride that growth wave. But I always tell people, if you can bootstrap it, if there's other means of capital available to you, go for it.
I have another question. I'm also in the biotech area, so not in IT. But I can say, question is for a pre-revenue for a biotech, maybe for years. So how would you, for instance, if you have see a great idea for IT, maybe a software or something similar to Facebook or whatever, I mean, and it's pre-revenue, would you fund that? And how do you fund that if the idea?
I think would I fund it? Possibly. We've like I said before, we've not done a lot of pre-revenue investing. It's been close. We would do that. How I would do that would be I don't know if you're asking what type of security or
how would you kind of evaluate completely an idea?
Yeah, it's much of it is the same process by trying to talk to experts in the field if we're not necessarily expert in the space, and doing much of the same due diligence checkings with potential customers, players in the industry, people within our network, whether it's in academic research or other companies we've invested in. So really exhausting our network and our contacts to dig into the opportunity. It's likely not going to be a $500,000 check from us on sort of a pre-revenue opportunity, but certainly I'm not opposed to investing in a pre-revenue company if it feels like the kind of transformative idea that Gina was talking about earlier in her question.
So let me come over to Kim maybe, and then we can work our way around. While you're working your way over, one of the questions we get asked as an incubator operator is do you know any VCs? And I think there's this perception that VCs are all hanging out in this smoky VC lounge, and none of us have the keys. So what is the best way, Nick, for these guys to find the right person, and how important is it for them to find that person too, I think?
Yeah, I think if what you're asking is how do you find VCs to invest, I think it's brute force networking and warm intros work the best. I have taken plenty of meetings with cold call, blind pings on my voicemail or on my email. I'm probably in the minority, to be honest, that would do that. I haven't invested in a cold call, sort of ice cold, hey, I'm Kim and I'm in a software startup and do you want to invest? I'm not sure I've invested in that type of, but I've taken the meeting and because part of the fun part about the business is to learn about all the cool stuff that's going on and try to figure out where the opportunities are. And so I'll be happy to take some of those meetings, but the best way to get in front of somebody is through a warm intro. If it's me and it's not for me, always ask somebody, well, if it's not, can you help me get in front of, always ask for the next introduction. And it's really, part of it is a test to see how good the entrepreneur is at networking and getting in front of the right people. Part of it is market research to figure out who the investors are that invest in your space and figure out, in this day and age, it's a lot easier to figure out how you're connected to somebody than it used to be. And so can you go through the grunt work to be able to do that and figure out how to get in front of the right groups and the right funds? There's no easier path really than that. It's exhausting your network and exhausting the research at your fingertips to try to get in front of people, because it really is. If I get a call from John, hey, you should really meet this company, I'm taking that meeting. Versus someone who calls me, and it could be the same person. Hey, love to sit down and talk. Well, I may or may not do that depending on how many other people that have given me warm intros. So it's sort of a horrible condemnation of the business, but it's a lot more relevant for me to sit down with warm intros and prioritize those versus cold calls.
So follow-on question to the valuation stuff we were talking about. Who typically sets that number? I just went to the Capital Network put on an event for 409As, and it was a lot about a third party doing it. And
yeah, 409A
when does that
is
happen?
totally different than...
So when does that apply? At what
409A
stage?
is a fantastic creation by the accounting world, and I used to be an accountant, so I can say this. Just to value the common shares for
purposes of marking them to market. So when you're handing out options, there's a price attached to it. It is totally irrelevant to the value of your business. It is derived from, in theory, the value of the business, but not in any kind of relevant way to your valuation for what you're raising capital. Basically, what they'll do is they'll look at public market comps. They'll look at your capital structure and understand, well, you did your last round at X, and by the time it flows all the way through to common, it's usually somewhere around 20% of the valuation. So it's
Going through rounds, who sets it? Is it
it's mainly
just a negotiation?
It's a negotiation. Okay. It's a negotiation. You'll come with a number, I'll come with a number that's less, and we'll figure out what makes sense.
Okay, got it. And then the last one is, you mentioned liquidation preferences. How common is that? Are they always applied when you go through rounds? Or can you sometimes squeak by without them?
You can. It's typically part of the preferred stock deal. A good thing to do in later rounds, because the last thing you want is, as you raise more and more capital, to have differing preferences and things that affect and make it a complicated capital structure. Later rounds, you can go back and cap those preferences to, it might be 1 times or 1.5 times, but it's capped at a certain dollar amount, so it doesn't keep infringing on everybody else's money down the line. So there's things you can do, but it's hard to erase that. It's hard to erase that. You have the mic, sir. Yeah.
Yay. Just a quick couple of questions. First, when you're talking about healthcare, you talked about healthcare IT. Do you consider that like telemedicine as well, or just back-end stuff? And the other thing is, I know that there's a lot of talk in investment circles about it. Drones, robotic overlords are a good idea.
Drones. So we've looked at a few drone companies. We tend to get these. A couple years ago, instead of drones, it was energy efficiency software, and now it's sort of drones. And these sort of things happen where there's 500 drone companies, and I'm, like I said before, not smart enough to pick which is the best one. So I take the easy way out and say, well, let me just wait a little bit.
Printing.
I looked at a 3D printing company recently in the. I like the space. It's interesting. Because as an M&A banker, I spent a lot of time in the 3D printing software space with the Stratasys and 3D Systems of the world, and that was 15 years ago when 3D printing was coming. I'm not quite sure it's all the way arrived. I think it's gotten more into the consciousness because of all the consumer-related 3D printing opportunities. But I love. As much as that's all software, I would prefer to look at hardware because I know what it does. I can see it, and I don't think many people are investing as much as they should be in hardware and manufacturing in Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Behind? Your question behind you. Yeah.
Thanks. Really? If you can hear me, that's fine.
It's just feeding right into
apropos of non-dilutive funding, MassVentures offers some.
Yes.
Can you talk about it, and also talk about it from MassVentures' point of view, what it buys that, let's say, putting it in as equity instead doesn't, since the equity might grow and the non-dilutive stuff won't.
Sure. So we run a program called the START program, which I believe is SBIR Targeted Technologies. And it's a program we started 5-ish years ago, mainly for SBIR Phase 2 companies within the last 3 or 5 years. I would urge you to go look at the website because this is going to be directionally correct, but some of the facts might be slightly off. If for companies, again, that have had SBIR Phase 2, we provide a program whereby those that are in Massachusetts can apply for our grant, which is a matching grant for 10 companies in their first year of being InStart. It's a 3-year program to make it even more confusing since it's a 3-year SBIR program or 3-phase. So phase 1 of our program, the START program, is 10 companies will win $100,000. And it's a pretty light application. The whole focus of the program is aimed at commercialization activities. So we are not looking to provide more funding for SBIR job shops. We are looking to take companies who have real technology and are desiring to make it into a commercial business. And again, the first year winners, we select 10 winners. I think this year we just came off of the program cycle. We had 10 winners win 100,000. Those 10 winners will then get judged a year later on things that they said they were going to do related to commercialization. The top 5 will win $200,000 in grant funding. And the idea is at the end of year 3, 2 companies will get closer to $500,000 in funding. So it's down selected each year, all based on commercialization. And the idea is those companies will then hopefully be relevant to our equity investment business. And you had a second part of your question that I'm probably forgetting. So if you can remind me what it is, that would be great.
Yeah, from MassVentures' point of view, what does that do for you? I understand the upside to it. The question is, how does that compare to the upside of investing in businesses that 5 or 10 years later turn into cash that you can put into?
Yeah, it doesn't
you can
compare.
Plow back.
It doesn't compare. The idea is at the end of the 3-year START program that we will have investable or relevant companies for our equity portfolio to then go ahead and invest in. And so the idea is to help create companies out of technology and provide opportunities for mentoring and things around IP and other sort of seminars, if you will, to help what are mainly tech and engineering heavy organizations versus commercialization talent, and help them migrate toward commercialization. And what does it mean to go run a business and start a business around this technology? And so there's no investment return for us during the course of the START program other than to do the altruistic piece of creating companies within Massachusetts that are hopefully, they're definitely, because I've recently seen the data, creating numbers of jobs. And then hopefully at the end, you know, if the opportunity warrants it, we'll invest in those companies. And something that a quasi-public VC would do, and likely not just among. Al, Jim.
I don't know if this question was asked earlier, but since your focus, or at least your concentration, is in software, do patents play an important part of your evaluation of startups?
They do. As I mentioned, we do a lot in robotics, and certainly there's plenty of patents that are relevant there. 3D printing the same way. We tend to like defensible IP, but I'll be honest, there's a handful of companies up there that aren't going to win or lose based on the quality of their patents. They have something that's certainly unique, and they're going to bring it to market effectively, hopefully, and sort of outperform and out-execute. In many areas, whether it's marketing tech or otherwise, it's difficult to rely on your IP as a real winning strategy. It's certainly if there are elements of it that help, that's great. But I think I don't want to say that IP isn't relevant to the success of some of these companies, but it certainly is a lot different than if you're talking about a robot company that has real hard tech around certain aspects of their robot. So it plays a role, but less so in software for sure than hardware. Okay. So it's about 7:10. We'll probably take a couple more questions. We started a little late, but the good news is Nick, I think, is going to be around for a little bit after, and opportunity for some follow-up questions at that point. So just 1 second.
Quick follow-up with what you said just now about the patent. And one of the opponents of emphasizing on patent is that is to ask the startup or the investor, why would you spend the precious capital from the VC to defend your IP? What is your take on that? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly an element of scarce resource being put to use to create a patent that may or may not be the reason why you're succeeding. And so if that's the question, I'm often erring on the side of put the capital to better use, particularly if it's an algorithm, you're not putting that out in the public domain anyway. And so there's an element of keeping some of that stuff as trade secrets versus patents. And I'm not an attorney. There's probably a few in the room that could talk more about the strategy around that. But if the question related to scarce dollars being spent pursuing a patent strategy versus an execution strategy, more likely than not in software, I'm pursuing the execution strategy. Okay. You two more, Joe? Yeah.
You quibbed earlier about being the cause of maybe many nightmares for entrepreneurs coming on in the board, and I presume a lot of those nightmares are caused by you picking at things that should be happening. But there's also the idea of good money versus bad money and risks associated with certain investors. Can you speak a little bit to the process that folks in the audience should maybe be going through when vetting investors of whether or not they could be good money for them versus a fit
Certainly
for somebody else?
relevant. It's a great question. Relevant deal history in the space. I think it's. I always welcome people, and it just happened to me on a recent deal. Can I talk to some of the other CEOs that you've worked with? Absolutely, go for it. You should be doing that because the last thing you want is to show up at the first board meeting and you really don't know who the hell I am that much and how I operate, and I'm showing up and I'm asking you questions and it's just not working out from the get-go. So you really need to understand, is there, aside from the fact that is there a shared vision of where the company can go, what the opportunity is, what sort of tactics around strategy and where we go from here post-investment, all these things I like to hash out beforehand, because if there's no sort of alignment of vision and expectation, then we probably shouldn't be working together. The joke earlier was sort of, it's usually the first time an entrepreneur's feet are sort of held to the fire by somebody else other than their own team, is when we're coming to play in an investment, and that's often a difficult spot for an investor to be in. Even some of the accelerators around town, the well-known ones, the Mass Challenges, the Techstars, and all these other folks, teach you how to go raise capital. Not many of them are teaching you how to run a board meeting or how to interact with your board and how best to use your board as an asset, which it should be. The worst board meetings are showing up and just listening to the numbers. I mean, you can send me the PowerPoint, I can read the numbers on my own. I'd rather talk about what we're doing as a company and how we can help. And so you want to align all of that stuff beforehand. So I encourage you all to ask questions of your potential investors, talk to their other investments, understand, when things get tough, do they, the arms get short and they go away from the checkbook and they run away, or do they have a good history of continuing to participate when the going gets tough, as it will? Are they supportive? How often do they swap out management team members, and how has that gone? I like to have that conversation before I invest. Do you think you're the CEO of the business long term? What do you see your strengths and weaknesses are? Is there a point where you'd step aside where that would make sense? And all these kinds of difficult conversations that it's just easy not to have, but it's brutal if you haven't had them and then you have to go have them after the fact. So I don't know if that answers your question. And I think remembering too that this is a marriage on both sides, and talking about valuation and the other pieces, the entrepreneur needs to be satisfied, as does the VC, and this relationship that's a long-term one. And as you talk about valuation, I know a lot of entrepreneurs that think about how much they scrutinize small decisions that they make around money, and then don't expect a VC to have that same expectation when they come in. So just remembering that this is indeed a partnership, as well as kind of a dangerous business. So if there's one more question, and I guess Over here, yeah, sure.
So I was kind of wondering more of the mechanics of a VC round. So you said it's usually $1 to $2 million, and you're giving like 200 to 500. So who else is in the round? Is it usually the same people? And then like, are you cutting the check, and then they're going to look for the people? Like, how does that work?
It happens all different ways. We've come in and led a round of a $2 million raise where I've spent a lot of time working with the founders to try to find other relevant investors, whether they be smaller venture capital funds or angel groups or individual angels. Spent a lot of time doing that. I've spent a lot of time equally where there's kind of a deal coming together and there's already a sort of a syndicate forming, and we'll just be a part of that syndicate. So it's kind of all over the place. It was certainly when we're leading a deal, we're playing a lot more active role in being responsible for helping you find other capital. But we'll do it all different kind of ways.
Is there a timetable how long it usually takes?
It can, let's see. Our process, and we might be a bit unique because we do have the sort of quasi-public nature to what we're doing, so there is definitely a process. It's anywhere from, I've done one as fast as a month, which is out of the ordinary. It's typically about 3 months. I've known a company for 9 months before I didn't do diligence all along that time, but I've been in diligence for quite a while on deals. It just sort of depends on where you are. But I would plan on sort of 4 to 6 months to raise a round.
So to wrap up, and everybody always talks about how to pitch and what you need to do during a pitch. I think I wanted to give Nick a chance to talk about what not to do. If there's any things that our entrepreneurs are out there, avoid at all costs. What are the horror stories? So.
Yeah, I've had, and maybe shame on me for taking the meeting, but I've had meetings and somebody comes in and they're pitching me on a biotech company, and within 30 seconds, I'm like, oh, how the hell do I get out of here? I should have known, it's just showing up completely unprepared, I guess, is you don't know our portfolio, you don't know where we play, and you sort of got a warm intro and you blow the chance. And so understanding what we do, where we do it, how we do it with companies is huge. I gave a talk a couple of years back, and I actually had some of these things to try to make it somewhat humorous. But one of them that I always appreciate is that we get to the financial metrics, and of course the numbers are going up like this, and there's always the statement that these numbers are conservative. So don't lie to me and tell me they may be conservative. They're going like this. Just tell me they're your numbers. You don't have to add the conservative part. I'll make my own assumptions, but the numbers are always conservative and they're never hit. So that's always interesting. For a while, people tend not to think about the exit at all. They just sort of come in and say, okay, they pitch the business and let's go off and do this. And I ask them, who's going to buy the business? And they say, well, we're going to get bought by Google for $1 billion, which is always great. I enjoy that one. Or then we're going to get bought by, call it GE as an example, but yet no, GE is an awful example. A company that has never bought a company in the last 4 years is going to buy them for a huge sum of money, but it's someone who's done 3 deals in their lifetime. And so there isn't a lot of thought put into how we're going to get out of the investment, how everyone's going to make money in the deal, and we're going to make a ton of money because someone who never buys businesses is going to buy the business. And it's really just coming in and not having thought through how your entire deck and pitch hangs together between what you're going to tell me you're bringing it to market and how that affects the sort of the go-to-market expenses in the model and how that ties to the size of the opportunity. There's usually a break point in there somewhere where the whole stream of it just doesn't add up. And those are the worst because it's just sort of, you didn't think it all the way through. The way you're going to market or how you're developing the technology doesn't jive with the model, and that doesn't jive with what the customers are looking for. So it's really, there's some interesting horror stories where I wish I was out of a meeting in 5 minutes, but that would be extremely rude, and I sit there. So it's do your homework, and when you get a shot at it, maximize it. Raising money, I have the utmost respect for entrepreneurs. It is a pain in the ass process. It is not fun. People are tearing apart your company any which way they can to understand it mainly, but everybody thinks they're the smartest person in the room, and so they feel the need sometimes to try to rip apart the company. That's not my approach. It's certainly the approach of many folks, but the nature of our business is we see 300 to 400 business plans a year, and that's on the small side compared to many of the other funds, and so we'll probably sit down with 100 or so of those companies, and we'll do 5-ish deals, 5-6 deals a year. And so the numbers make it a difficult process. You guys have to knock on a lot of doors and go through the pitch a ton of times, and it's a tough haul. So when you get a shot, maximize it. That's really my only advice.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the Venture Forum. Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. Nick's going to be around for a while, so we can follow up the questions in kind of the networking session afterwards. And thank you, Nick.
Cool. Thank you.